So welcome everyone. I hope you enjoyed your lunch break. Sorry, the coffee break, I'm already thinking about the lunch. So welcome to our second panel for today. It's characterized by 3 L's, law, land, and language. I'm Bilal Orfali, Professor of Arabic in the Arabic department here at AUB. We have 3 speakers for this morning. Each of them will have 20 to 25 minutes because we have a very tight schedule before the lunch break. Then we can probably accommodate 2 or 3 questions before we conclude the panel. Our first speaker, I'm sure you all know each other by now. You've looked at the bio at the end of the booklet, so I will not introduce our... Sahih. Less is more. So our first speaker is Baki Tishkan from the University of California, Davis, USA, and his talk is entitled Rumis in the Ottoman Imperial Judiciary of Arab Lands and Arabs in the Imperial Mosques of Istanbul. So please help me in welcoming Professor Tishkan.
Thank you. I would like to start by thanking the organizers of the conference, especially my colleague Ali and Professor Abu Hussein and Mr. Nazi, who was so helpful with everything, for organizing, inviting me. Thank you. This morning, the focus of my presentation will be a prosopographical study of the Ottoman chief judges of Aleppo and Cairo during the roughly 100-year period from 1550 to 1655. The written version of the presentation will, inshallah, include the chief judges of Damascus as well. Let me first start by providing you with the context of my research question. We have convened here to evaluate the impact of the Ottoman conquest of the Mamluk Empire on the region. As one of my dearest professors, Rifat Abul Hajj, noted, the Ottoman past of Arab lands has been evaluated by Arab scholars in different ways throughout the 20th century. I myself grapple with finding a conceptual model that could be used as a tool to describe the relationship between Istanbul and the Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire, especially Egypt and the Greater Syria. If one were to look at the annual summaries of Ottoman treasury accounts indicating the income and expenditure of the central treasury, it appears that a wealth transfer took place from Egypt and the Greater Syria to Istanbul, at least in the 16th century. These figures are from the late Halil Inalcik's monumental study, the first volume of An Economic and Social History of the Ottoman Empire. This transfer of resources continued, at least as far as Egypt is concerned, all the way to the late 19th century, as I was recently reminded by Amy Janelle, that Egypt continued to send funds to Istanbul even during the British protectorate, although these funds did not enter Ottoman coffers as they were used to pay the Ottoman debt to European powers. Thus, it would not be wrong to state that the Ottoman capital exploited the financial resources of at least some of the Arab lands to pay for the expenditures elsewhere in the empire. I'm well aware of the fact that Ottomans also invested resources in Arab lands, as can be discerned from the numerous foundations that were established to fund the various charitable establishments, such as mosques, madrasas, soup kitchens, caravansarais, and the like in these lands. Of course, one might argue that had the resources of Egypt and the Greater Syria been fully reinvested in those lands, one could probably build more of them. Yet, as Professor Al-Juba's presentation demonstrated, some parts of Syria were actually better funded by the Ottomans than they were by the Mamluks. So there, more research is needed to come to a conclusion. Should we look at the portrait of just financial exploitation and call the relationship between Istanbul and the Arab lands a colonial one? I would not go that far, for the relationship between Istanbul and many Anatolian and Balkan provinces were not that different. The financial exploitation of agriculture and trade mainly paid for the army, navy, and the imperial administrators. This was the case for, say, Bolu in Anatolia, just as it was for Beirut. I should add that this was pretty much the case for all pre-modern imperial centers and their peripheries in world history. Another way to look at the relationship between Istanbul and its many provinces may be through the distribution of political patronage. did Ottoman subjects have equal access to opportunities that would make them part of the ruling class? By the time Egypt and the Greater Syria became part of the Ottoman Empire, the higher-ranking administrators of the empire were mostly of devshirme origin. That is, they were drawn from among the Christian subjects, mostly in the Balkans, some of whom were handpicked by imperial administrators to join the army or the administrative hierarchy and converted to Islam. Thus, a Muslim city dweller in Bolu and another one in Beirut were equally excluded from opportunities to join the upper ranks of the Ottoman administration. While the devshirme monopoly in the upper ranks of the imperial administration started breaking down in the late 16th century and eventually disappeared completely by the 18th century, which led to the entry of commoners into the ruling class that I very much emphasized in my earlier work, for the purposes of this paper, which is meant to tackle the transition from the Mamluks to the Ottomans, I would like to continue working with the assumption of a devshirme monopoly, as the Ottoman devshirmes were comparable to the Egyptian and Syrian Mamluks in excluding the Muslim majority from higher positions of power. Otherwise, one could easily argue that the Ottoman rule turned out to be beneficial to the development of Arab political leaders, as many of them came to rule the Greater Syria as local governors in the 18th century, and in some localities like parts of modern Lebanon, even earlier. Even at the height of the devshirme monopoly of administrative position, however, there always was a way that offered a certain degree of upward mobility to Muslim commoners, both in the Mamluk and Ottoman empires, education in madrasas. Theoretically speaking, one could study hard and become a professor of law or a judge and thus join the ruling class in its low to mid ranks. Some of these judges could eventually attain high rank and have access to empire-wide power networks. The research question I'm trying to answer today is whether Muslim subjects in Arab lands had the same opportunity as the ones in Anatolia in reaching high ranks in the Ottoman judicial hierarchy. And if they did not, why? Abdul Karim Rafiq, in his seminal study, Relations Between the Syrian Ulema and the Ottoman State, stated that the Ottomans appointed Rumis as the Hanafi chief judge of provincial capitals. I will try to provide some more statistical details and geographical scope to this answer by concentrating on the chief judgeships of two major Arab cities, Aleppo and Cairo, this morning. My research confirms a tendency that has already been noted in several studies. The Ottoman judicial establishment in the pre-modern period was quite tightly controlled in the hands of certain families on the upper levels of the educational judicial hierarchy, and yet gradually opened up to others in the lower levels. The prosopographical research I will present to you this morning suggests that the relative openness in the lower levels was limited geographically. That is, aspiring scholars from Anatolia, and to a lesser degree the Balkans, had a higher chance in entering this hierarchy than those from the Arab provinces. In the concluding section, I will speculate as to why this might have been the case. In parts, thanks to the work of my graduate school mentor, Norman Itzkowitz, I have been interested in prosopographical studies of the Ottoman ulema for some time. In a previous work, I studied the very top of the Ottoman ulema establishment, that is the senior justices of the Asian and African provinces, Anadolu Kadı Askeri, senior justices of the European provinces, Rumeli Kadı Askeri, and the grand or imperial muftis, Sheikhul Islam, who held office between 1550 and 1650. This study, which included 81 individuals, demonstrated that almost half of the scholars who occupied positions at the very summit of the Ottoman educational judicial hierarchy between 1550 and 1650 came from some 11 families. About 4 out of 5 men, 79% in the whole group, were related to others who had previously held a position in the state apparatus or the court. A small group of 21% were upstarts, lucky enough to obtain the protection and support of a powerful patron. Using this data, I argued that it is possible to see the Ottoman mevali, that is the higher-ranking judges of the Ottoman Empire, as a sort of aristocracy, and suggested that we might call them what the term mevalis implies, the lords of the law. My results were very much in line with those of Madeline Zilfi, who studied the Ottoman ulema of the 18th century and emphasized the concentration of the higher positions in the hands of a limited number of families. This relative monopoly on top positions is not difficult to explain. At least from the early years of the reign of Suleiman on, all of the professors in the major colleges of law in Anatolia and the Balkans, as well as the judges, were appointed by the imperial center. There was a hierarchical order among the colleges, and here, in the interest of time, I'm going to go a little bit faster So if you start teaching at a college of 20, excuse me? Oh, all right. Okay. I'm sorry. All right. So a student who didn't have any backing would have to start at a college of 20, 20 meaning the mudarris teaching there receives 20 akças a day. So then he would go study with a different mudarris at a college of 25, college of 30, 40, 50, 60 eventually. And then he would wait for a mulazamet, sort of a license to teach. And that was actually more difficult to secure than sort of being a student of somebody, because you had to know somebody really powerful, high up. Only the very top guys were able to issue mulazamets. And that was the way in which sort of who can enter was filtered. Once the mulazamet was secured, then the student would become a professor and then do the same hierarchy as he was a student, first teach at a college of 20, then 25, then 30, then 40, etc., etc. An alternative could be becoming a judge at a small town while you are teaching at a college of 20 or 25. You could skip any more and then become a judge, but then you would remain a small town judge. If you want to have a big judgeship, you really had to go all the way up, teach at the Dahil colleges, and then get a judgeship, that which would give you access to the appointments in the highest paying judgeships, which started with Aleppo, Damascus, Cairo, Bursa, Edirne, and Istanbul. Mecca and Medina were added to this list too. And then people who served in Istanbul would become the Asian senior justice, and then European senior justice, and then some of them would become Shaykhul Islam. So this was the hierarchy. On the lower levels, though, the upper levels were controlled and tight, but Denise Klein in einer MA-Thesis in Germany, die Osmanischen Ulema des 17. Jahrhunderts, eine geschlossene Gesellschaft, in this study, she shows that the lower levels were actually more open, so more newcomers could come from the lower levels. She used Ushakizade's Zeyl Shaqaiq as her source. I wondered whether the chief judgeships of Aleppo and Cairo would be sufficiently lower than the positions of the Grand Mufti and the senior justices of the Asian and European provinces, so that one could observe a relatively higher representation of newcomers among them, who might perhaps include some local Arabs. It turns out that this is not quite the case, but the figures are still interesting as they provide some further details to our knowledge. Although there were 150 altogether there were 150 individuals who were appointed to these two posts, Aleppo and Cairo, between 1550 and 1655. I chose this period for the existence of continuous and reliable data in the biographical dictionaries of Atayi and Sheikhi, and my intention to reach a round number of appointees, 150. Some of these individuals served in both judgeships, some of them served more than once. Confirming some of the earlier findings, I observed that some families were very heavily represented. So, for instance, there were 6 different Bostanzades among these 150 individuals, 3 Karaçelebizades, 3 Uşakizades. So there are certain families that come up often. A total of 101 appointees were related to other members of the Ottoman educational judicial establishment. 15 others were connected with other types of Ottoman officials. So out of 116 out of the 150 appointees, which would make 77%, had an advantage to their peers that helped them to move faster and reach a high-ranking judgeship like the ones of Aleppo and Cairo. If we compare this figure with the earlier one, we can observe that the monopoly of the privileged members of the ulema is still quite clear in the chief judgeships of Aleppo and Egypt, which are actually 4 or 5 steps below the position of a senior justice, that is a Qadi Asker. The positions of the Ottoman chief judges of Aleppo and Cairo are only a tiny bit more open to upstarts than those of the Qadi Askers and the Grand Mufti, 23% as opposed to 21%. If one were to conduct this study in a later period, one would probably find a larger degree of openness, as most of the commoners I identified among the Ottoman chief judges of Aleppo and Egypt were appointed in the second half of the period I studied. Now I would like to add a couple of dimensions to this general portrait of the Ottoman ulama, not really to revise it, but rather to supplement it with some further details which actually support the argument for the relative hegemony on the upper levels and the relative openness in the lower levels. These details will also introduce another element to the larger portrait, the geographical hegemony of Anatolia and the Balkans as the birthplace of the Ottoman ulama in the higher ranks. There were altogether 34 chief judges of Aleppo and Cairo in the period 1550 to 1655 who did not have any relation to the members of the Ottoman educational judicial hierarchy or the Ottoman state apparatus. 2 of them were from the Eyüp district of Istanbul, 15 from Anatolia, including Kurdistan, and 9 from the Balkans, accounting for 26 out of the 34 appointees, that is 76%. 6 appointees were immigrants from farther east, such as Nahchivan, Qarabağ, and Shirvan. The number of upstart appointees who were born in the Arab lands of the Ottoman Empire was only 2, one from Aleppo and the other from Syriacus near Cairo. This is not an isolated phenomena that is only observable at the top of the Ottoman educational judicial hierarchy, though. I conducted a similar survey among the newcomers within the 160 professors who taught at the College of Mehmet II, Sahne Semen, in the roughly 30-year period between 1574 and 1603 as part of a yet unpublished study at a different conference presentation. Almost half of the professors who held an appointment at the Sahne Semen during these 30 years did not have any relatives who could help them in an Ottoman ulama career, 78 to be exact, which clearly shows that newcomers did have an almost fair chance to compete with their more advantaged peers to secure an appointment at this prestigious College of Law in Istanbul. Here, I must emphasize the significance of an appointment at the College of Mehmet II for one's future career. Out of the 150 appointees to the chief judgeships of Aleppo and Cairo in the roughly 100-year period between 1550 and 1655, 142, that is 95%, had taught at this college earlier in their careers. So you had to teach here to be able to then become a judge in Aleppo or Cairo. Now, in this particular professorship, you have non-privileged professors, what I call non-privileged, 78 of them, the newcomers. One can identify the geographical origins of 68. This is the period from 1574-1603. Out of these 68 professors, 52, that is more than 3/4 of the group, originated from the lands of the empire that correspond to modern Turkey. 7 came from the Balkans, 1 from Crimea, 1 from Western Persia, Iraq, Ajam, another 1 from Transoxiana, 3 from the Caucasus, and another 3 were of slave origin, one of whom was identified as a Croatian. And most of the 52 professors who originated from the lands of the empire that corresponds to modern Turkey came from central, northern, southern, and western Anatolia, with only 3 professors from the east and southeast, that is, in this case, Antakya, Maraş, and 1. In short, at mid-career levels in the late 16th century, even though there is more social mobility, for sure, there seems to be different institutional barriers in place that privilege the western part of Anatolia and practically exclude the Arab provinces and North Africa. In the concluding section of my presentation, I would like to speculate about the reasons of this near exclusion. While it is not easy to account for all the factors that contribute to the creation of such a tight focus on Anatolia and a seeming exclusion of the Arab provinces, an easy one to identify relates to access. Several, that is 11 out of 68 or 16% of the Sahne Semen professors of humble origins in my data pool secured their licenses to teach from Ataullah Efendi, the teacher of Selim II. Ataullah Efendi had himself strong ties to Anatolia. He was from Birgi in western Anatolia, where he also endowed a madrasa. And he seems to have acted like a clearinghouse for many professors of humble origins from Anatolia and the Balkans. One can imagine how a Western Anatolian student of law might have had a professor who knew another Western Anatolian scholar like Ataullah, but it would be very difficult to imagine how an Arab student, say in Aleppo or Cairo, could find a way of reaching out to someone like Ataullah Effendi for a teaching license. Let me share an anecdote to illustrate the difficulties faced by Arab students of law. My anecdotal example is the famous 17th century Damascene scholar Muhammad al-Amin al-Muhibbi. Izzeti Mehmed Effendi, the nephew of a former Shaykh al-Islam, while he was the judge of Damascus in 1654-55, he had promised Fadlullah al-Muhibbi that he would grant a teaching license to his son Muhammad al-Amin in due course. In 1668, when Izzeti Effendi became the senior justice of the Asian provinces, he kept his promise and sent a teaching license to the young al-Muhibbi. So the young al-Muhibbi didn't have to go through all of the colleges. He received the teaching license by mail because the senior justice trusted that he would have received a good education. And then he got a teaching appointment in Bursa. In 1669, Izzeti, his patron, became the Chief Justice of the European provinces and promoted his young protege to a slightly higher ranking college. But Izzeti's days in office did not last long. The young al-Muhibbi stayed with Izzeti in Istanbul during the latter's retirement, hoping that his patron would be reappointed and he could get an appointment to a college in the Ottoman capital. Yet Izzeti died in 1681. Having lost his patron, al-Muhibbi left Istanbul for his hometown. There he engaged in scholarship and produced quite a number of works on literature and history, among which his biographical dictionary, Khulasat-al-Asar, is one of the most frequently quoted sources for the history of the Eastern Mediterranean in the 17th century. Thus, even if one were lucky enough to get to know a member of the Ottoman educational judicial hierarchy in the Arab provinces, once that member lost his position, there was no one to fall back onto, whereas someone who went through the colleges in Istanbul as a student would have his peers and other professors to seek help from. Let me take a moment to state something as a side note here, though. I'm actually very glad that al-Muhibbi did not do well in Istanbul, because had he done well, he would be too busy with the politics of appointments to write any of his works. The biographies of most Ottoman professors and judges in the central lands of the empire read like a register of official appointments, whereas the biographies of Arab scholars in Arabic biographical dictionaries of the Greater Syria, they're actually full of written works, some of which, like al-Muhibbi's, became key works for centuries to come. Other than this practical question of access, there was a larger issue affecting Arab students that relates to the politics of Ottoman law, I think. The Ottoman lands had not always been unwelcoming towards scholars from different parts of the Islamic world. A well-known Syrian scholar of Hadith and Qira'ah, Ibn al-Jazari, was most welcome in Bursa during the reign of Bayezid I, and even joined the Sultan in some of his military expeditions, including the Battle of Ankara, after which he was taken to Central Asia by Timur. Bayezid's grandson, Murad II, consulted all the four chief judges of Cairo, representing the four schools of Sunni law, before he attacked the Karaman Principality in Anatolia in order to legitimize his war against another Muslim polity. Murad II also welcomed Mullah Gurani, who had immigrated from Cairo, and appointed him to mentor his son Prince Mehmet, the future conqueror of Constantinople. And there are other examples. I will not dwell on every one of them, but what is important to note is that this trend changes. As the Ottoman scholarly establishment grew and the Ottomans came to see themselves as the political leaders of the Islamic world, their patronage became more restricted. So, for instance, we have Muslahiddin Lari, who had been the tutor of the Mughal Emperor Humayun. He arrives in the late 1550s in Istanbul. He has a letter of introduction from the Ottoman chief judge of Mecca. He is a great scholar, but he doesn't receive any patronage in Istanbul. He ends up in Ahmed, the capital of Diyarbakr, and Baghdad, mostly under the patronage of Iskandar Pasha, a general of Suleiman and the governor of Diyarbakr and later Baghdad. The great commentator of Ali Kushti's work on astronomy was not able to secure the patronage of the great-grandson of Mehmet II, who had patronized Ali Kushti. And there are other examples again here too. Scholars who originated from the farther ends of the Ottoman domains did not fare much better either. We have a few examples such as Ali ibn Hamza al-Maghribi, a great scholar, has a work on mathematics, but is not able to receive a lot of patronage in Istanbul. What happened then between the mid-15th century, when the Ottoman center was much more open to foreign-born scholars, and the mid-16th century, when some of those foreign lands had actually become Ottoman territory? One of the important changes was the consolidation of Turkish as the main administrative as well as legal language, which created a certain degree of hindrance to Arab scholars. But I believe the larger part of the answer has to do with the political relationship between the Ottoman state and the law. As argued by Guy Burak in his recent book, The Second Formation of Islamic Law, the Ottoman center took an active part in shaping the structure and doctrine of a particular branch within the Hanafi school of law. Burak shows how Ottoman scholars in Anatolia and the Balkans came to support the development of what might be called an official school of law by rewriting the history of Hanafi law and also interpreting it in ways that facilitated a sort of pre-modern codification, which allowed quite questionable practices such as the cash waqf that legitimized a certain practice of interest in the marketplace. Burak also demonstrates how Hanafi scholars in the Arab lands of the empire opposed some of these developments, such as the appointment of official muftis to provinces. In short, the Ottomans were interested in centralizing the interpretation of the law, while the legal tradition in the Arab lands of the empire privileged a larger degree of pluralism, which is actually more in line with the early development of the law in the Islamic world. A very fitting example to the point I'm making is provided by Abdurrahim. The Ottoman feudal system was based on the idea that peasants had to stay where they were born. A fief holder, that is a timarlı sipahi or timaryot, had the right to bring back peasants who moved elsewhere back to their original villages. So here we see Professor Rafik quotes, this is him, he basically explains how there were a lot of timar holders who would go bring peasants back to their original villages by sultanic orders, and the judges had to approve this. But the local ulama, they contended that a Muslim is free to live wherever he desires. They quoted the example of the Prophet Muhammad, who himself fled Mecca to Medina to avoid persecution and who ordered the Muslims to flee their original homeland if they were coerced and to settle wherever they found goodness. On the legal side, the ulama absolved the villagers from the responsibility of going back to their original villages to work on the land there, whether that land was freehold, endowment, or state. Clearly, the Ottomans expected their jurists to privilege the interests of the state, as opposed to those of the individual subject, when it came to a clash between the two. I believe it was the significance of this political interpretation of the Hanafi law that led the Ottomans to privilege the students at the legal colleges in Anatolia and the Balkans in choosing appointees to professorships in the central lands of the empire, where they kept a close watch at the curriculum. Similarly, they wanted to appoint judges and chief judges who would not challenge the centralizing tendencies that privilege the interests of the state over those of the individual. The best candidates would be the ones who went through an education that was provided by those scholars who had internalized that statist tendency, that is, again the students of Anatolian and Balkan colleges of law, especially the ones in Istanbul, where the impact of the statist tendency was felt most strongly. The colleges of law in Arab lands, where legal pluralism had been enshrined in the representation of 4 schools of Sunni law in the Mamluk Empire, and where even Hanafis dared to challenge the Ottoman center, were not fertile ground for the Ottomans' more statist conception of the law to take root. Even some Ottoman legal practices were not holding root there. For instance, the permission granted to cash waqfs did not become as popular in the Arab provinces as it did in Anatolia and the Balkans. Thus, the Ottoman center allowed a certain degree of autonomy to the way in which law was interpreted, taught, and even applied sometimes in Arab lands, but in return did not grant these interpreters the same status that it did to the ones in the imperial capital. Let me finish by touching upon the second half of my title that I could not get to during this presentation because of time constraints. Some scholars might be inclined to explain the near exclusion of the scholars of Arab lands from the higher ranks of the Ottoman imperial judiciary by referring to a pre-modern version of ethnic tension between Arabs and Turks. I would not agree with them, as there are not only some successful Arab scholars who made careers for themselves and their families in the Ottoman judicial hierarchy. An example I did not touch upon is the family of Shahranizadeh, who were related to the well-known Egyptian Sufi, Abdul Wahhab al-Shahrani. But there are several well-known reciters of the Quran, imams and preachers, who served sultans, or came to be liked by the masses in Istanbul in the 16th and 17th centuries who were of Arab origin from Damascus, from Cairo. One of the key texts of Ottoman jurisprudence, Mutawakkil al-Abkhur, was written by one of them, Abdurrahim al-Halil B. Thus, non-legal careers that are related to Muslim practices such as leading prayers, offering sermons, and reciting the Quran were much more welcoming to scholars of Arab lands than the legal ones. Another crucial point to note here is that the Turkish-speaking Ottoman jurists were not even called Turks, but referred to as Rumis in Arabic sources, which emphasized not the ethnic, but the geographical, and arguably the imperial Roman character of the Ottoman administrator and judges, and the law they represented. Thus, unlike modern colonialism in which the construction of ethnic and racial differences played a key role in the political relationship between the imperial center and the colony, the relationship between the Ottoman center and the Arab lands might perhaps be conceptualized as legal imperialism, in which the center asserts the superiority of its own political interpretation of the law, but does not attempt to transform the interpretation of the law in the periphery, leaving it, to a certain degree, autonomous. And yet, by the very act of granting a limited degree of autonomy to the interpretation of the law in the periphery, the center produces a certain power differential, as the peripheral interpreters are not able to exert much influence on the interpreters of the law at the center, while the latter reign over the former. Many thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Professor Tashkan, for this very well-researched paper. Our second speaker for this panel is Dr. Zashan Forat from Istanbul University. Her title is Egyptian Ulema in Istanbul After the Conquest of Egypt. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Forat.
I just want to thank all of you for being here, and I also want to extend my thanks to the organizers, of course, to Professor Abu Hussein for inviting me to this amazing conference, and I hope that you enjoy it so far. And just want to use the time a little bit economically. I just want to cut it very short and make it very simple. My topic is about the scholars in exile in Istanbul. We all know that actually after the conquest of Egypt, Selim I took many people, many prominent figures from Cairo to Istanbul, and most of the people are arguing about it in their academic writings. However, we see mostly that they are some kind of in discussion of, let me just put it in this way, they're just rephrasing the situation in some kind of two-edged question. So we see that from the Ottoman point of view or from the modern Turkish point of view, it was kind of a scholarly acquisition from the Egypt or from any else in that period. However, on the other hand, let's say from the Egyptian or from the Arabist point of view, that was kind of an example of the Ottoman colonialistic policies in the region. Because most of the scholars are now, especially in the late period, are referring to that process as part of stealing the wealth or stealing the heritage of the locals to Istanbul. So this paper is not aiming actually putting all these questions in a political sense, but rather take it as a historical phenomenon and just try to concentrate on these Egyptian scholars within the frame of their role or their contributions in the Ottoman intellectual life. So I just wanted to talk on two different cases. One of them is the question of what happened to these Egyptian exiles in Istanbul. I'm going to start with this question, and then I'm going to go to the case studies because, I mean, we see quite a lot of people, prominent figures, leaders, family members, scholars and historians who were taken to Istanbul at that point, at that specific point. So When you talk to any historian of science, of course, they're going to list you a long list of the transfer of knowledge. They're going to tell you the political encounters, they're going to tell you the social interactions between the cultures are the main reasons for the transfer of knowledge. And then we see that at that point, that specific period, actually the wars were among these main reasons how the transfer of knowledge taken place in Ottoman world and let's say in the Ottoman world. Similar cases can be seen starting from the Alexander the Great. As we all know, he went to the east and took many goods from the east, and then it somehow helped to generate the Hellenistic culture. However, in the late period, for example, in 15th century, we see that similar actions were taken by other conquerors, like Professor Tezcan, for example, just mentioned a couple of scholars who were taken to Samarkand with Timur, for example. They were regarded as one of the sources for kind of a change, for kind of a development in their own cultural heritage, maybe. But in Selim's practice, it was a little bit similar, and it was also a little bit different because we see that the same thing, same practice happened in Tabriz before the conquest of Egypt. In Tabriz, certainly the Ottomans faced with many developments, especially in the arts, and that they took several people, artisans, and certainly ulema with them to Istanbul, and that became somehow a part of, they explain somehow the development of the Ottoman Turkish arts, especially in the field of miniature. So, but we see also in this period, especially in this specific case, Selim I, for example, took some ulema, among them Kadızade Zahiruddin Erdebile, who will be involved in Ahmet Pasha's case in Egypt later on, and he's going to be a very, not important, but he's going to be a very famous figure in this revolt. But how was the Egyptian case? That is certainly our question. And we know that Selim I, after settled down all the situation in Cairo, we know that actually the conflicts and the violent clashes between between the locals and the Ottomans were just continuously affecting the people. And after the all settlement just established, or the Cairo was settled, Selim I commenced on certainly implementing his policies, especially in administrative point of view. And among these policies, exiling prominent figures were one of the most important measures Selim I took at that point. So the preparation period for the exiles started a little bit late, let's say April 14th, 1517. According to the historical data, actually Kadızade, Zeyrekzade and Mehmet Pasha was involved with the selection of the exiles, and then the shipping of the exiles started on July 15th of July 1517. That was a very long period. That was a long process, let's say, because we see that the shipping didn't occur in just very specific moments, but they started to ship people by or group by group in the period of time. So the question is that who were they really? What were the reasons for sending them to Istanbul? How did their exile end? And how did they do during the exile? So what we see is actually when it comes to their profile, Sultan Selim I didn't actually took only the ulema with, but also took many artisans, craftsmen, QADIS, for example, officials at the courts, notables, merchants, some groups from Cairo Christians and Jews. The thing is that it's easy for today to get some kind of a list, thanks to Ibn Ayas, for sure. For example, this actually slide shows you list of the QADIS in exile. You can see that actually there is a long list. However, because of the reason that he was using nicknames, most probably. You see that Shamsettin, for example, Kemalettin, these are the nicknames or epithets you may call it. It's very hard to define actually who they were. On the other hand, when you look at the biographical sources, you can still say that there were some specific people who were also inside this exile process. So what were the reasons for sending them to Istanbul? It depends on the group, obviously. When it comes to the prominent figures, it was certainly kind of a security measure. That was sure, because he was anxious that they would stay there and just cause kind of a disorder in Cairo. And certainly there were some practical reasons, like building his own establishments in Istanbul, and then he faced good, handy people who were very much talented in their own works. So this is why actually we can say that some practical reasons were also on the scene. Ibn Iyas strangely says that the Ottoman settlement policy was actually one of the reasons. We know that Ottomans were just they had their own policy for settlements. They were just relocating people. For example, when they went to the Balkans, they took several groups from Anatolia to settle them there, and then they also moved some local people to Istanbul or to some places around Anatolia. These are obvious reasons for sure, but on the other hand, some scholars say that that might be also kind of an economical consideration involved in the process, because Selim I was expecting that the trade rules would be changed, and the Portuguese were very much in the lead of this change. So he took some merchants, some tradesmen to Istanbul, so that he could make the port, Istanbul port, an important place for the future trade intersections. And of course, scholarly ambitions were also involved. Selim I wanted to have some ulema so that the discourse in the academic discourse or scholarly discourse in the Ottoman cultural zone would just be developed in this regard. So how did their exile end? I think this is the most important question. They returned, for sure. They didn't return like all together in a couple of years. They returned starting from actually 1521 or something, and then it's just continued until the end of the return. Actually, the last return was al-Mutawakkil's return. The Caliph was also inside the exile list. So when he returned, we can say that the over was the issuance of an official permission from the Sultan Süleyman I. That we are going to talk about it later. So the question, what did they do in the exile, really? These are our case studies. I just went through most of the historical resources. However, it's very hard to find exact names. However, I was able to find 4 scholars that might be interesting for you. One of them is not a scholar, but he's the most, I think, important figure in this period, the Caliph. What happened to the Caliph? Did he die in Istanbul? How was his relation with the Sultan? Was among the most important questions that the modern scholarship actually is still one of the most important questions that the modern scholarship is posing. The second one is a family. Maybe you have heard about them, Qaysunis, Kusunis, maybe you can call them. And then they became like the chief of the physicians of the court. They were also in the exile list. Another one, Ibn al-Naqib. He was actually the teacher of the Sultan Gavri's son. He was taken as a prisoner during the Marjadabuk, and he was taken to Istanbul among the other exiles. An historian we have, that's Abdurrahim, as my professor. Abdurrahim al-Abbasi. There are some rumors about his life, actually, that we are going to say. So the first one, the the one, let's say, the last caliph. He became the caliph in 1507 or 08, I'm sorry, and the historical sources are actually depicting him in very different ways. In one point, he goes unwillingly to Aleppo with Sultan Gavri. Sultan Gavri says that, okay, you're going to come with me to Aleppo. He doesn't pay any penny to him. He has to afford his own, outcomes, and then, but he goes. Then he becomes prisoner. He was captured during the Merjadabak with other 4 QADIS, actually. And then he returns back to Cairo with the Ottoman army. And then he turns out to be a mediator between the locals and the Sultan. And then it's certainly while he was enjoying basically the wealth of the people in Cairo, he became somehow more important in the eyes of the Sultan. But then something happened. Their relationship got a little bit bad. And then he turned out to become one of these exiles in Istanbul. So the Sultan took him to Istanbul. The same thing happens. The history goes in the same direction. In the beginning, he becomes very important in the eyes of the Ottoman scholars, maybe. But then he starts enjoying the taste of this life. And he ends up in the prison, Yedikule Zindanları, which is pretty famous. But it's very interesting because Ibn Iyas talks about the Yedikule Zindanları, 7 tower dungeons, as a place which is in 8 days in that distance. So it can't be possible. So we should be a little bit, we should be very much careful about reading this text. However, we know that according to the historical data from the Ottoman side, we also know that he was in the dungeons for some times until Sultan Süleyman rescued him, not rescuing, but granting him his permission to come back to the court, and then he returns back to Cairo at a certain point of time. So what he did in Istanbul, it's a question, certainly it's an open question. What we know is that he certainly enjoyed his life. The strange thing is that in Ottoman historical data, we don't know the details of his life. But we know from the Arabic resources that he got involved kind of a conflict with his cousins. The cousins were also with him in Istanbul, Abu Bakr and Ahmed, and they certainly had some kind of an idea that they should be the ones following the Caliph. And they were complaining constantly. They were filing constantly complaints to the Sultan and the Viziers about the situation. They were very much discomfort about the situation, that they were not paid well, and the Caliph was taking their share also. So when it's just ended to the lifestyle of the Caliph in Istanbul, certainly what happened is that he was just disregarded, granted, let's say. So the other occasion Ibn Iyas was mentioning is that prominent figures were about to escape back to their town, back to Cairo. So Caliph's possible escape would just steer the interest of the Sultan. So he kept him in the dungeons for several years. Not 1 or 2, I think it was like 5 years that he stayed in the dungeons and that he continued to enjoy his life there. Then he was released by the order of Süleyman I. This is interesting. He was granted 60 dirham per diem. With the dirham in this point of time, I think it was like 12 akça. So it was not a small amount of money, actually. And then he was paid for his residence. He was paid for his other tastes, let's say. And then he returned back to Egypt in 1524. And then we were talking about this with the professors, whether he was involved in the Ahmed Pasha's revolt in Egypt is still an open question. But the thing is that Diyarbakir, mentions his manuscript. It's like an addendum to Ibn Iyas' work. He mentions that he returned in the he returned during the January of 1524, but he mentions on another occasion that actually Ahmed Pasha was blessed by a caliph. Sorry, the other way around. I mean, in the beginning, the Al-Bakri mentions that he was blessed, Ahmed Pasha was blessed by the Caliph, so the Caliph should be there. But on the other hand, on another occasion, he says that he returns on the beginning of December. So it's not possible that he was in Istanbul, he was sending his blessings to the Ahmed Pasha, and then something happened. It's not that much possible. So most probably there was another kind of a Caliph named maybe as Caliph or not, we don't know. But he was not that much certain, it's not that much certain that he was involved that much into the revolt. So he dies in 1543. We don't know the details, nobody mentions about him anymore, and then he disappears from the whole historical data. The second case is Qaysuni's. Actually Shamseddin Muhammad Qaysuni. He was the chief of the physicians in Sultan Gavri's court, that's for sure. He was also in Marjidabak. So that's interesting because the Caliph was in Marjidabak with 4 QADIS, all right? This one, Qaysuni, was also in Marjidabak, and we will see that the other case is also involved in Marjidabak. So it's a little bit interesting to see all 3 of them were involved in this war. So, and they were taken as prisoners during the war, and they were sent to Istanbul afterwards. This one, Shamseddin Qaysuni, lived in Istanbul until the death of Selim I, for sure. He is the one actually responsible for all the information we have now because he was constantly sending letters to his relatives in Cairo. So he was gossiping. He was saying that this guy was doing this, and for example, the Caliph is dealing with this problem. So he is just like the main source for all the events that took place in Istanbul. He returns back and he dies in Rosetta in 1524. And, well, his story ends at this point. However, his son, Bedrettin, who didn't go to Istanbul by the occasion of the exile, he was asked for his leave to Istanbul afterwards to become a court physician. And he's also an interesting figure. This is Zelheim's prominent work, let's say. This shows all the family line of Qaysuni's. And Bedrettin is actually, I think he's one of the most famous ones because Atayi mentions him as a great deal. He was in Sgetvar, and he was the one who was assigned to embalm the body of the Sultan Süleyman. So he became quite prominent, and then he was in tight relationship with the court for sure. Then he and his sons, his offsprings, let's say, stayed in Istanbul for a very long period of time, and they contributed to somehow the Ottoman literature that we are still following. We can still find some available sources from this family in the manuscript libraries in Istanbul. The interesting thing also related to Qaysuni that I should just mention, Qaysuni was not actually exiled because of that he was a good scholar or something, because Atayi specifically mentions that he was close to the court of Sultan Gavri, and he was a good, talented man. So that was something else. He was not a scholar. He was not regarded as a scholar when he went to the exile. He was in the list of the talented men. So that's a little bit tricky. Because, I mean, afterwards we will see that he is going to continue to show his talents in the court. So Garsaddin Halil al-Naqib is another story. He studied in Aleppo, Damascus, medicine, astronomy. In Cairo, he came to Cairo by walking. Actually, this is what the resources says. He came to Cairo by walking. It mentions many times that he was walking all the time. Maybe he was a part of Mashayikh. Anyway, he became very famous in Cairo and appointed as a teacher actually, for Gavri's son. He was also in Marjidabak. So he was also part of the campaign of Sultan Gavri in Marjidabak, taken as a prisoner again and sent to Istanbul. He was offered many times official posts. He refused. He made his life, he afforded his life by giving some private classes, according to the biographers. And then he returned back to Damascus. He comes and goes back. His travels are like coming here, going back to Damascus, going to Egypt. It's just like a whole route is very interesting to see. But it's interesting that he was not dealing with the religious studies, actually. He was working on astronomy and mathematics. He was regarded as one of the inventors of the astronomical equipments in Ottoman circles. This is his manuscript. Not his manuscript, of course, it's just a copy. However, it's his Risale on sign calculations. That period of time, there was a huge discussion among the scholars about the calculations of sign. So he took his part for commenting on the Castellani's perception of sign, and then he wrote a Risale. It's available in the Süleymaniye library, and he goes with. I'm just finishing. He goes with these calculations in another work. You can also see that here. This is the first page. He gives some names afterwards. He gives some terminology afterwards, which is very interesting Risale, actually, in this regard. The last one, Abdurrahim al-Abbasi. He was born in Cairo. He traveled to Istanbul 2 times. He's a special case. We are not sure whether he was in the list of exiles. He went to Istanbul for the first time by the order of Sultan Gavri in a kind of accompanied to a special envoy. Then he found a chance at that point to present his commentary on Bukhari to Bayezid II. This is that one. This is the original. This is his copy, actually. He presented it. He was offered to take a position in which is very interesting, in the madrasa of the Sultan's own madrasa. So Bayezid II, the madrasa of Bayezid II is famous. Most of us know it because mostly Shaykhul Islams were teaching at this specific madrasa. So he refused that. We're not sure whether he was offered for such kind of a position, but the thing is that he refuses this offer, and then he goes back. After Atai says that after he stayed there, he decided to come to Istanbul because Gavri's administration was collapsed. We don't know whether he was in exile or he preferred to go to Istanbul by his own will. But then he made his life in Istanbul. He settled down. Strangely enough, he participated in Rhodes campaign, and he wrote an interesting history about the campaign there. And then his works on religious studies especially continued, and they are certainly available as it is in the manuscript libraries of Istanbul. These are 4 cases that I wanted to present to you. Different cases for sure. One of them is the most important person of the year, that period for sure. But the other ones are relatively scholarly figures. However, their impact on the cultural zone is still in question for us now. So we know actually the links with the Egyptian scholars had long been established. Many Ottoman scholars came to Cairo to be educated here, return back. This is very normal because you are at this point you need human resources, let's put it in a contemporary context. And then certainly most important scholarly circles were in Egypt, in Tabriz, and then that's very normal that Ottoman scholars were going there and taking their education. However, we see that during this campaign, there is one special character actually in the city of Cairo, Gulsheni, Ibrahim Gulsheni, who is a sheikh, Halveti sheikh. He was located in Cairo at that period, and Selim visited him. He paid a visit to him. He didn't ask him to go to Istanbul. He rather said, you stay here. But afterwards, after the Ahmed Pasha's revolt, we know that Ibrahim Pasha came here and saw that he became kind of a figure for the Cairo. And then he was a little bit anxious about his doings here. So what happened that he took him with, he didn't take him with, but he asked the Sultan to send him an order to go to Istanbul and present himself in front of the Sultan and just tell us about the real story, what happened to what he's doing in Cairo. This is another story. So he led people to stay in Egypt. He didn't take all of ulema or something. Then scholars, we see that among the lists, scholars are just very limited in numbers. Most of them, as I told you before, most of them were the prominent figures, were the political figures. So it's very hard to make a generalization, whether he took them specifically for that reason. And then we have to maybe pose the question, there is certainly a change in the academic discourse in Ottomans at that period. We see that actually in the juridical discussions, there are so many radical points. They were introduced by that time. And according to some scholars today, the main reason for this kind of introduction was actually coming from the Arab world, coming from the conquest, the exile list of the conquest. So Egyptian scholars' impact on the religious studies are just very much limited in this regard. However, we should say that we are just talking about the exiles, not exactly the people who preferred to stay in Istanbul, who went to Istanbul. So these are two different phenomena. Not exactly the exiles were just doing that on purpose, but most probably the ones who wanted to go to Istanbul later on, for some reasons, Professor Tezcan said that this kind of a complication relationship in the political sense were very much on the scene. So we don't know it for sure yet. So how we are going to qualify basically the Sultan's role in this whole thing? Whether he was a patron or, just granting some, benevolence, some money to the ulema who's just supporting them, or who is just a pragmatist, who just wanted to take whatever he saw. This is still an open question for us, but we see that all these four cases are just representing different parts of this whole story, and then we know that these complications are very much on the road for the future academic works. Thank you very much for your patience. This is what I wanted to present.
Thank you, Dr. Farad. Our third speaker is Dr. Himmat Tashkomor from Harvard University. His title is Law and Politics in 16th Century Damascus. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tashkomor to AUB.
Oh, pardon. This is, the shows that effect of the jet lag that I saw the Beirut and immediately thought that it is the mine. Thank you very much, Professor Orfalı, for the kind introduction. And actually, I slightly changed my the title, which is different from the one in the program, that is Law and Lawmaking in the 16th Century Ottoman Bilad-i-Sham. The law and the lawmaking in the 16th century Ottoman the Bilad-i-Sham. This apparatus is very limiting for me, and I'm not used to giving the speeches in sitting, but I will try my the best. I can't, otherwise I will be in terrible. I can't hold that. This is so. Thank you very much. Well, then I will deal with PowerPoint after the end of, or you may later on. Thank you very much, and I would like to also start by thanking organizers of the conference, particularly to Professor Abu Hussein and Mehmet Ali Neyzi, who kindly invited me to attend the conference and facilitated its realization. As many years, I think, accumulated great depth to the many professors who works on the Ottoman history with a focus on the Arab provinces, such as the Nelihana, the Professor Abu Hussein, Abdul Karim Rafiq, whom I owe the great deal. And I acknowledge their kind help and instructions over the years. I truly appreciate. And also remember Halil B from Istanbul. He passed away, rahmetullahi alayhi rahmeten wasi'atan. The issue that I will be speaking about, law and lawmaking, it is particularly issue of the formation of the Ottoman Kanunname, or how Ottomans codified the laws, starting from the early the first quarter of the 16th century. In the Bilad-i-Sham, excluding the Egypt, that is requiring the much the different study that I can do, and along with this Kanunname or lawmaking the process, and the other the local reactions, and also Arabization or translations of the Kanunname into the Arabic the language. Unfortunately, none of the Ottoman Kanunnames, to the best of my knowledge, that is very much based upon the Turkish the scholarship and the European scholarship, the scholarly edited and published. There is a publication of Ahmet Akgündüz, a colleague, published the Kanunnames of the 16th century. But many of them are, excluding the Arabic, the preambles, and often not much the analysis of the text that we have, archival sources. My study primarily based upon the existing the Kanunnames, and also a unique Mezalim register from the 965, the 1540, compiled by Ahmet bin Hasan es-Samsuni, who was appointed as an inspector to go over the Sinan Pasha's, the Beylerbeyi of the Sham, and number of the subashis, the officers of the law and order in Damascus, and the cases, legal cases, pertaining to the malpractices and certain issues regarding the application of the Ottoman, the Kanunnames in the region. And the third is the translation of the Sham Kanunnamesi, the law code, in the late 16th century by the Aleppon the scholars, Ibn Bilal. Baki Bey they previously talked about existence or non-existence of the Arab scholars in the legal hierarchy. And Ibn Bilal apparently, all the information comes from his own the testimonies in the introduction of his the legal pamphlets that he compiled, was serving under the Sheikhul Islamate of Ebu Suud Efendi, famous the 16th century Ottoman the scholar. Many of the pamphlets, the pamphlets he wrote in Istanbul, he clearly declares and acknowledges that the works that he wrote as a service to the Ebu Suud Efendi, which originated from number of the legal the cases. Ibn Bilal's the translation of the Kanunname is previously published by a Tunisian the colleague and scholar Abdulmajid Shaban in 2001 in Majallat al-Tarikhiyya al-Arabiyya li-Dirasat al-Uthmaniyya, and I found another copy in Istanbul which very much overlaps, with minor the differences in these two the copies. But when we talk about the lawmaking, in Bilad Sham and particularly the post-conquest era, the first issue comes to my mind is problematization of the notion of the Ottoman conquest. How ideologically and legally the Ottoman conquest was conceptualized by the Ottomans in the early 16th century. As the Ottoman sources, they refers the Ottoman the conquest as Fethi Hakani, or Arabic al-Fath al-Hakani, as opposed to, or to distinguish from the Fethi Islami, i.e., the opening up a lands that there was not previously under the Muslim dominion. Therefore, this is a sort of an imperial conquest, but not necessarily, the conquest in an Islamic sense. And there are certain the political the ramifications of this the concept, which we may deal with in the questions and answers the section, and I will not go much into. But for the purposes of my own talk, this the 1516 or 1517, the Aleppo, the Damascus, and then all the Cairene, the takeover by the Ottomans, is an watershed the moment. It's the critical the event in history, but it is not the beginning of everything in a true sense. There is a process, the gradual process of the transition from the Mamluk rule to the Ottoman. And in this process, and it becomes quite crucial that what we call this the lawmaking is very much the heavily relies on the existing the legal existing the Mamluk the legal practices. One issue here I would also like to highlight is when we talk about the territories that were incorporated by Ottomans and the Kanunnames that were drafted is much larger territories than the existing Bilad Sham, i.e., the the areas, the southeastern Anatolia and also southeastern Mediterranean region, which were somehow the vassal, the beylikat or emirates, like the Ramazanoğlu and Dulkadiroğlu, the Feridun Bey, they talked about them yesterday. And these were, and also under somehow the Memluk or the legal the system, which was incorporated into the Ottoman the system. So the earliest the codification, and I'm using codification in a very the light sense, not in a very strict the legal sense of the term, of the lawmaking, kanunname making of the Ottomans is roughly the 1524 onwards. So there is really a gap between 1517 to 1524. We have some the testimonies such as the Abdüssemet Diyarbakri, Zishan Hanım, they mentioned of him, as to how Ottomans really ruled over, the post, the conquest, the era. It's very much is relying, the existing the Memluk the practices, which over time the Ottomans either the amended or the fully, the reappropriated into their own the legal the structure. For example, in the areas of Adana and the Sis, the 1524 the Kanunname, they mentions that this is a very much of a reworking of the Kayıtbay the Kanunnames, and both of the Kanunname, both Adana and Sis are the identical, almost the verbatim the copies of the each other. But the Kanunnames that are the more the Aleppo, the Damascus and the many other the cities in the region clearly indicates that the Ottomans abolished some of the Memluk the practices. When it is the full adaptation of the Memluk code, it is they mentioned which kanun or which sultan's kanun they are talking about, like the Kayıtbay kanunları. But when it is referred in a very generic sense, is Cherakise, the Cherkessians, to distinguish their state from the Memluk the state, the two. And referring to abolishment of the certain bid'ats, the Cherakise zamanından bazı bid'atlerin the kaldırılması, refi, I'm sorry, but doesn't really, the clearly, articulates what were those, the bid'ats that, the Ottomans are the abolishing, and I really don't have much clear the answer as to these abolishments. The Kanunnames of the Bilad al-Sham, over time, they amended and changed. They are not, they remain static. And during this the process, it seems that there is an also negotiation between the population of the region with the Ottoman surveyors and the kanun the makers. For example, in the Sham Kanunnamesi, it mentions that and after the abolishment of certain the Memluk the practices, the Ottomans they levied that a married person should pay 140 the Aleppan coin, and the unmarried the person should pay the nothing. And then they say that the Kanunname states that the people came and complained that this is a law that they cannot really, abide with, and they cannot really meet its the demands and ask for the emendations of the Kanunname. One second. Regarding the question of the legal actors in this the process, and of course the Rumi scholars, probably these people in the Kanunnames, their names are they mentioned. Some of them are Rumis, clearly from Istanbul or the other Anatolian the places, but also looks like that they are very much they worked in collaboration with the local scholars in drafting these the Kanunnames. So this is a very much a dialogic the process is not just the demands of the Istanbul or the centers or the Ottoman the administration, but it's very much the working together to find a workable legal procedures, they're not necessarily a codified the legal the articles at hand. And Baki Bey already they mentioned about the control of the top judiciary of the Bilad Sham Arab provinces by the Rumi, the judges and scholars. But at the same time, there is another the strong current was taking place that the niyabets, the more the delegate positions are primarily controlled by the scholars from the region. That is and very significant the bearing on the Ottoman the legal institutions in the Bilad Sham. And I know very closely the Jerusalem case, for example, where Khalidi family, whose descendants are still, exist today, clearly controlled for about like 300 years not only niyabets in the provinces, but also the chief clerkship, the Bashkatib, the ship of the Mahkeme in Jerusalem and in the adjacent the areas. In 16th century, of course, the Cairo always, loomed large in Ottoman the scholarly the concerns and world, but the post-conquest, the Ottoman world and Ottoman administration and scholarly world turned to the Cairene and particularly Memluk the scholarship from a different the perspective. And I think this is a very significant the development. In 15th century, Cairo was very much a center of learning where, the students from an Anatolian stock, they traveled to get the education, and many of them also rose to prominent positions like Ekmelettin Baberti, the Kemalettin Ibn Humam, Muhyiddin Kafiyeci, the significant towering Hanefi figures of this period. But their impact in their the place of origin was rather limited. With the exception of Muhyiddin Kafiyeci, for example, I haven't seen any works of Ekmelettin Baberti, who wrote a major commentary on Al-Hidayah, as being copied and read, in Istanbul before the 1520s. This is really a post the conquest the development in the the Hanafi the scholarship. I'm a little bit arguing against also our dear the colleague the Guy Burak the two in that sense. This turning to the Memluk Hanefi, the scholarship has then also practical aspect too. You know, like the Makrizi, and whose manuscripts and autographs were brought to the Cairo. Not only the Arabic texts were brought to the Cairo, they were also translated into the Ottoman Turkish for the practical the purposes. We do have the translations of the Makrizi's the Khitat, and number of the other the legal texts like the Tarsusi's Tuhvet-ü Turk Fima Yecib en Yu'mele fil Mulk, a book that argues for the legitimacy of the Turkic Memluk the rulership in Cairo. That is, you know, translated into the Ottoman Turkish, and of course this early, you know, the Memluk, you know, the dynasty, Turkic the dynasty now the very much applied at the Ottoman case, you know, and their the rulership and its the legitimacy in the region. And Baki Bey already they mentioned the Ibrahim Halebi, the Multakal Ebsur, but the Ibrahim Halebi and figures like him are not an isolated the figures. You know, again, starting with the mid-16th century onwards, we will see the scholars from the region, and including the Shami scholars, the writing and incorporating Ottoman the Hanefis into the larger tabaqat the works. And in this context, I would like to mention the Şemseddin Ahmed ibn Tulun's a major the work Al-Ghuraf Al-Aliyya fi Tarajim Mutaakhir Al-Hanafiyya, a major the tabaqat the work which to this date remains the unpublished as the manuscript. And also Taqiyuddin al-Tamimi work Tabaqat al-Siniyya fi Tarajim al-Hanafiyya, and also the Şemseddin Ahmed ibn Tulun's Sugrul Basham fi Qudat al-Dimashq al-Sham, which is very much, you know, the narrates a narrative of a smooth transition of the judiciary from the Memluk to the Ottoman, which Professor Abu Hussein mentioned, the Ibn Farfur, the family, and their role in the Damascene, the legal the system. All right, I'm tentatively concluding that the lawmaking process in the 16th century Bilad-i-Sham was a dialogic process. In this dialogic process, the law codes, the Kanunnames of the Arab eyalets, should be treated as legal codes, not in the strict sense of the codification, rather as regulative guidelines and principles whose articles owed great deal to the existing Memluk the law codes. Furthermore, law codes were further amended, and gradually Ottoman regime established itself as the primary lawmaking the institution, yet the arena of law was open for negotiations between the practitioners of law and the society to whom these laws were applied. Thank you very much for your kind attention. This is the partial list of the Kanunnames and the date of the compilation. It's the earliest starting from the 925 and ending closely, there are, the continuations, but also, the differences between, each the rearticulation. This is the title page of the Register of the Teftiş. It is in Ottoman Turkish. Emri Şerifi Cihan Muta Muktezasınca sabıka Şam Beylerbeyisi olan Emirül Ümera-i Kiram Sinan Paşa'nın ve subaşılarının mekayif ve mezalimi bihasebi şer-i şerif görülüp üzerlerine zahir olan kazaya defteridir. This is an 200 page the register which very much oversees the legal case brought against the malpractices of Sinan Pasha and Subaşı, the law and order the officers from this the time period. This is the one settlement case I typed in Arabic, and I will read. Salaha Ali ibn Khalil min qaryati Danistan تابع قنيرة مع داود بن عبد الله عما ادعاه وهو مبلغ 25 سلطانيا سلطاني إذن the money الذي أخذ منه بغير حق وهو صالح معه على مبلغ إسنا سلطاني وخمس قطع مقبوضة مصالحة صحيحة قاطعة للنزاع ورافعة للخصومة ثم أبرأ كل واحد منهما ذمة الآخر عن جميع الدعاوي والمطالبات عموما وخصوصا جرى ذلك وحرر في سنة 56 و900. The cases that are, the related to the sulh, the settlements, are predominantly recorded in Arabic, are very much, in this the similar. But the cases that related to other the administrative the malpractices were predominantly in Turkish, and I have just one page to show how it the looks like. This is part of the page. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dr. Tashkomura, and I would like to invite all the speakers actually to take their questions. We have roughly half an hour for questions. They will use this one.
My question or comment is for Baqi. Of course, I found this paper very, very interesting, and it puts things in place. In a way, it tells us what we know, that there's not much scholarly exchange at the high level. But I just wanted to point out, I believe that there is a big difference between scholarly exchanges in Syria and in Egypt. As far as I know, in the period of 300 years of Ottoman presence in Egypt, there was one Qadi Quda who was from here, and that was Ahmad Khafagi. No more, no less. I believe in Syria, the exchange was easy. Of course, proximity is an issue. They're very close. There is maybe a greater circulation of people in general, and certainly a greater circulation of scholars, as we know from Muhibbi, who's, I agree with you, a very precious source. I like him very, very much. But I also want to add, when we think that these are two separate entities intellectually, I should also add the fact that there is another structure in Egypt. And to a certain extent, that structure may have been consolidated by Ottoman authorities, although, as you know, the 16th century is not very well covered, so we don't know that much. But who started Sheikh al-Azhar? Who made Azhar the most prominent madrasa? It was not the most prominent madrasa in the 15th century. It became the most prominent madrasa. Sheikh al-Azhar became almost number one religious figure in Egypt. And therefore, there is a structure to allow for promotion. You have to be in the Azhar. This is one point. I have a tiny secondary point to make. I know it's not part of what you said, but it's part of the bigger picture about exchange. During a short visit I made to al-Sulaymaniyah, I found tens of copies of works written here in the 16th century. I mean, here in Cairo, of course. The works of Ibn Nujim, for example, became very, very popular. I can't remember how many copies there were, but there were many of his works. The work of Isharani, very, very, very popular. He was very prolific. At the time I was in the Sulaymaniyah, they were using card catalogs, so I can tell you it was more than one, one drawer with nothing but Sharani. So there are exchanges, but at other levels.
I would definitely acknowledge that, and actually I would like to underline that my presentation should not be misunderstood. That I didn't mean to say there were no exchanges. I was looking at who gets to become the chief judge. The exchanges are much more than we acknowledged so far. I think new studies are actually showing a deeper level of exchange. I came across to some of that in my own work. I work on Qadizadeh, and he actually has a presence. He apparently was, it looks like, in Egypt, and he actually directly studied with Laqani there, and then he comes back to Istanbul and becomes a very major figure. And what he read in Egypt, I think, had a great degree of influence. This is just an example I came upon myself, and many other new scholars focus on this, these exchanges. There's no question about the deep level of exchange. And also, thank you. This just gives me a opportunity to underline the local structures were very much filled by local scholars. Already, he mentioned that. The chief judge who came, as far as I can tell, did not really have a lot of transaction day to day. Even in Hanafi law, there was a local Hanafi judge who actually dealt with most of the daily affairs. I think his presence was more there to look at cases that are about public law, that in which Ottoman state, like, something like a Timariot might be a party. So he was more of a supervisor to look at the cases of public law. In the local cases, there is no question that local scholars continued to serve as judges, and they produced families of judges. And the point about al-Azhar is extremely important. I recently came to look at a new study. Apparently al-Azhar it attracted students during Ottoman era from all over the Islamic world, including Anatolia. There was apparently a sort of a college, Rivaq, that was for the Atrak from Anatolia who stayed there. So there is no question about that, and that happened under Ottoman rule. So the internationalization of al-Azhar, it's coming to the current stature, definitely. My point was more about sort of opportunities for advancement in the imperial hierarchy that might bring people to really top positions.
A very quick follow-up. Given your response to that question, which I had the same thought, do you not think that this can push us maybe to do away with a center-periphery model of analysis in the first place? It seems to me your talk is still framed within a logic of an imperial center and a periphery, very kind of old model of looking at the Ottoman situation. Do you think this actually invites us to rethink that and perhaps even do away with that model completely?
I think on a cultural level, intellectual level, I think that would definitely be the case. But I think it would be wrong not to recognize sort of the legal imperial power. That power did mean something when it came down to certain issues, and in that power seems to have been more populated by Anatolians. I think not recognizing that would not be realistic. But in the intellectual level, in sort of scholarly exchanges, in what they wrote, what the scholars wrote and interpreted and commented upon and exchanged and debated, there is no question that scholars from Arab lands had a big presence in Anatolia. The people in Anatolia actually quoted Remli all the time in 17th century. It's just that the issue is somebody like al-Ramli could not become get to the center. There was that glass ceiling. That is the point I'm trying to make. You're right. I would definitely push for more even cultural and intellectual exchanges, no borders in that sense. But there is also sort of a administrative structure that seems to have been, yes, power, exactly, power. That is what I'm interested in, power.
No, sorry, there are three different questions, four actually, one here, the gentleman there.
So it connects to what came before. And actually, like, I had a problem with the end of your presentation when you presented this other side of like these scholars who came to the Ottoman Empire and were welcomed, but none of them came as a jurist. And I think that this is an important factor, even though those scholars that we're talking about, they can be, you know, they can be adib, they can be faqih, they can be Sufi, but then like in some of these areas, they are welcomed to join in and maybe even get a following of their own. There is a lot of more cases, especially Maghrebi Sufis who like kind of travel through the Mamluk lands and then arrive in the Ottoman lands. But still, we should distinguish there between the Ottoman state. They call out they call out or they make the call in terms of judiciary, and that's what their system is about. And all the other scholarly activities, they are left as they are, I would say. And there you have much more the local traditions, whereas in the judiciary, there is a center. There is I mean, at least if we follow Burak's argument, there is a center with the dynasty and the Sheikh al-Islam at the top. And then from there, it's a trickle-down effect, at least within this state-sponsored part of the Hanafi school. And this has then to move within the specific local context, where I agree with Dalia that it's not that simple that, you know, everything comes from the center, but it comes in with a certain, you know, it's also a certain capital that it brings in, that in the end, like what this judge decides is backed up by the whole bureaucracy, whereas the other decisions just happen on the local level. I would also go back to Madame Furat's talk and ask just two questions. How do you know that those people you're working on are prisoners and not people just, you know, like if I could be the physician of the Sultan, why does that make me a prisoner? Like, I don't argue with you about the Caliph, but the other cases I don't see. And then how do you justify calling it colonialist policies so early before the term? And you know, like this kind of presumes also like that there are nation states involved, or at least on one side.
Shall I? Or okay, however you like. It doesn't matter.
Take this one first.
Okay, thank you for the question. According to the Ibn Iyas, they were taken as prisoners. Not prisoner, maybe I'm using the harshest word that I could ever choose. That's true. We were just talking with the Professor Bozdan a couple of minutes ago, and then he asked me a similar question. How do you know that for example, even if it comes to the Caliph, how do you know that actually he was captured? So whether he was captured, whether he was taken as a prisoner, it's very much debated question, that's for sure. But in the Marja Dabak, if we can just think about the situation, how was the wartime, and then most of the professors here can just answer this question better, the wartime, the conditions in the war. According to the historical data, again, resources actually, we know that they were in prisoner. But the thing is that the prisoner in the sense, not that was just like captured by hand or something, most probably. They were taken as a prisoner, and then they went to Cairo. Then they went to Cairo with the army. So the good thing is that, for example, these are two different things. Like, certainly the Sultan paid his gratitude, let's say, or paid, give some kind of a comfort to the Caliph. And then he said that, where are you from, actually? And then he said that, Baghdad. And we know the story from Ibn Iyas, for example. And then he comforted him and then said that, okay, I'm going to take you to Baghdad and come with me to Cairo. But it's not like, maybe I'm just using the wrong definitions to put it. Maybe I'm just choosing the harsher way to say it. But all of them were involved in Marja Dabak to some extent. So the second question, I think this is the most important questions. Okay, we can just debate about it, but what I was just trying to do was just reflecting the views of the modern scholarship about the thing. So I am not using actually, I'm not saying actually that this was part of a colonialistic behavior of the Ottomans, but I was just trying to tell there are two different views on the issue. Modern scholarship, rather from the Turkish point of view, you can say they take it like enhancement, like an acquisition of the scholarly works, scholars to Istanbul, or from the other side, they say that, so the Ottomans came here as a colonialists, and they took even the books, took all the books, and then took them to Istanbul. So that was for example, unfortunately, it's very unfortunate to say that, but in some modern scholarship, you see that also that was the reason why this part of the world was just like in this position afterwards. So this was actually also my, let's say, my criticization to some extent. Thank you for just bringing it up.
I'll just give a very short response. What I was trying to say was not that it was only jurists who came, or not jurists who came, but earlier in the period, before the sort of consolidation of this ulama structure, there were actually Shaykhul Islams of Arab origin. Some of these scholars in the early 15th century who came from Egypt actually became muftis in Istanbul. But we do not see that after that. So once this structure is consolidated and a certain statist interpretation of Hanafi law is put at the core, issues like the interest rate or certain other important points where the interests of the state become very heavy, after that moment, we don't get to see scholars from Arab lands coming and joining the structure and rising high up, whereas before we did. That is, I think, an important distinction.
We have a lot of questions, so please keep your questions direct to the point and short.
Yes, I have a question for Himmet Bey. I wonder whether you could, I wonder what you could say about the spread of the Timar regime in Arab lands in the 16th century.
Thank you very much. This is a great the question, but the Timar system it's spread in the Bilad Sham, is not an homogeneous and unified, the system. There are, the regions where it was applied, and there were the regions where it was not, the fully applied. And not all Kanunnames are also talking about, the Timar-related issues. Some of them are more the taxation-related issues and related to the criminal law and the things like that. But it's more of a north, I would say north, but even then it is, throughout the 16th century there are fluctuations, it's not the homogeneous the system, I would say. Yeah.
من موقع التقدير للباحثين يعني لي مداخلة صغيرة وسؤالين لدكتور همت تشكبر. هناك ترجمات كثيرة يعني منها للدكتور خليل ساحل أوغلو الذي ترجم قوانين النامة آل عثمان. هناك مونتران وسوفاجي ترجم قوانين نامات بلاد الشام إلى الفرنسية. وهناك عمر لطفي بركان نشر كل قوانين نامات. هلا سؤالي نقطتين. بالنسبة لي إلى أي مدى كان هناك تطابق بين القوانين النامات وقوانين المركزية للسلطة؟ لأنه القانون النامة هو توفيق بين التقاليد القائمة في المنطقة والقوانين المركزية. والسؤال الثاني، إلى أي حد كان هناك تطبيق للضرائب خاصة، علما أنه نلاحظ قرارات المهمة دفتري كانت توجه إلى الولايات خاصة في طرابلس تحذر من العودة إلى الضرائب المملوكية كالفراشية والطباخية وغيرها. معنى ذلك أن كان هناك خلل في تطبيق القوانين النامات. وشكرا.
شكرا ده أستاذ للأسئلة. يعني بالنسبة للترجمات يعني التي يعني أشرت، يعني أنا خاصة أشير إلى الترجمات إلى اللغة العربية في ذلك الوقت، يعني لا أريد إلى الترجمات المعاصرة يعني ترجمت من طرف الباحثين، يعني أنا خاصة أشير. وبالنسبة النشرات من طرف عمر لطفي باركان وأحمد أككندز، يعني معظمهم نعم يعني نشر، ولكن بدون نشر الديباجة، يعني الديباجة العربية، معظم القوانين الموجودة يعني هذا القسم. كمان أحمد أككندز في نشره يترك هذه القوانين. والمسألة هنا ليس فقط يعني كتابة من الحروف العربية أو نقل من الحروف العربية إلى حروف اللاتينية، ولكن التحليل القانوني والمقايسة والمقارنة بين القوانين الموجودة في المنطقة. يعني هذا ما أقصد يعني من نشرها. بالنسبة للضرائب يعني لطرابلس يعني أنت ده حق، يعني هذا يعني التزامات ورجوع إلى الضرائب المملوكية. يعني هذا ما ذكرته أيضا، يعني هذا ليس فقط يعني قانون العثماني من الضرب من الأعلى إلى الأسفل، ولكن يعني حركة التقنين يعني بالمحاتزة وبالمكالمة بالقوانين المملوكية في المنطقة. يعني this is the process يعني I am talking about that is very much in conversation with. It is not an abandonment of the fully of the Memluk system, but it is a long-term the process that culminated probably late the 16th century.
I want just to suggest to Baki Bey that there was also a natural unwillingness on the part of the Arabs or people of the Arab provinces to actually make it into the judicial system because they were reluctant to travel. And in fact, we know some of those who had traveled into Anatolia or more to Istanbul felt not because of ethnic prejudice or anything, but felt actually very strange. One of them says, شعرت كالثور الأبيض في القطيع الأسود. So there was a feeling, and people who made it actually as, not as judges, but as scholars, as mudarrises, and sometimes at the highest level, preferred to retire back and go back to Damascus or to Aleppo. Abdurrahim al-Abbasi, that Zashan mentioned, is one notable example. Abdurrahim al-Abbasi was offered one of the most lucrative jobs in Istanbul in the madrasa, but he declined and went back to Cairo. And I wonder if Abdurrahim al-Abbasi is the epithet Abbasi, if he is of the Abbasi dynasty, considering that he was sent to Istanbul on a mission by the Mamluk Sultan earlier. So that's just a comment.
The last question here.
First, on the Tarabulus Kanunname, I think that's a good case in point in which, because there are two in effect, one in 1519 and one in 1552. And there, in different instances, at the first and at the second, the Ottomans modify what existed and they precise, and this is a law which only exists and which is an important law on the custom dues. So they precise only for Tarabulus that 100 zira of that textile will worth and have to pay, this amount of akçes, etc. It's only for Tarabulus, but they amend, they change, it's an important case, I think, the case of Tarabulus. And the second thing, perhaps all
I
these...
said this is also, this is not
ongoing process. It was just an addendum. And second one is on the sak mecmuaları. I think that may be very important, because I had just a year ago, I think, I paginated sak mecmuası from Tunisia, which was for an Ottoman Kadı, but who was a Malikite Kadı, but it was for an Ottoman judgeship. Perhaps we have to, yes, power, authority, center, periphery, these are important, but let's go on the ground and check for the different sak mecmuası, which is the procedure of judgment and decision, and then perhaps we can make another sort of remarks on this peripheralization, Shafi'ite, Malikite, Hanefite, etc.
I think this is very significant. If I, respond to your the question, the model, the legal writings, the sukuk or al-Makhadr was-Sijillat, as it was, called. I'm very familiar with, for example, what existing the sukuk, sak mecmuası in Khalidiyya library, the Nazmi Bey, the catalog, the Arabic, and all the Ottoman, the sak mecmuası that from the mid 16th century till the mid 19th century, like the Shanizades, the sak, and then also Musazade. The whole exists at the Khalidiyya library, which is very much, unifies the legal language. But when it comes to the Arab provinces, there are two aspects of it. One is, the daily working language of the court, which was, the Arabic. But there was also another set of registers, which is the registers of the fermans that were coming from Istanbul. They were always recorded in Turkish. Mostly, not all of them. Just quick question regarding the political prisoners. And I think the term sürgün must be, the historicized and understood as it's the full implication. It's not just, for political purposes. We know the sürgün is also, the forceful, the resettlement were an Ottoman policy in the Balkans for, the tribes. But also forceful, the resettlement or the retaking of the scholars are not something uniquely Ottoman. And we know, for example, the Timurids were of a similar kind of the practices, and Ibn Khaldun, and the well known to all of you, barely escaped of his, the Timurs, the owned, the taking him to the Samarkand. Thank you.
أسمع أجراس الطعام تدق ولا كلام على طعام. Please join me in thanking our panelists again.